service. There we go. Okay, so we're recording now. Inez, if you'd like to get started, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Everyone can listen to me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And well, we prepared these document shepherd functions. How doing it well with the AC. And the main content of these presentations will be define what is a write-up, when is the right moment to do it, the role of the document shepherd, as well we are going to cover the life cycle stage about that, the selection of the document shepherd, which are the types of the document shepherd write-up, and how can it be updated in data tracker. Okay. For us, when we have to define what is a document shepherd write-up, write is a document which summarizes the current status of an internet draft in process to be published. And okay, that is the definition. And now, when is the right moment to do it? Okay, we have different moments in the process, during last call, before last call, or after last call. And if we take a look at the stage in a document life cycle, we have a different stage. And the shepherd write-up underway is after the working group last called and before the AD evaluation. So as well, this write-up, we believe that should be updated during the process. And our first shot was, okay, this write-up could be evaluated after AD evaluation, IETF last call stage, ISG evaluation, and in the RPC editor queue. So at that moment, the document write-up should be updated. So do you agree with that? Yes, no? Okay, answer. So, okay, let's take a look at the draft label extend document shepherd. Okay, for the author, the shepherd, please see the shepherd as a function, shepherd write-up function. And in the draft, it states that the shepherd function will be done in each stage. So each stage has tasks that could be done by the shepherd, document shepherd person. So at this point, the selection of the document shepherd should be done before start the process. So it's the first thing to do before the call for adoption. So now let's see how are the tasks for the person or step.
Inez, can I interrupt a second? So I think this is something a little different from what we've been doing. This is being pulled out of Barry's draft, right? Where he's saying it would be useful to have the shepherd selected earlier in the process so that they're paying attention to the draft and following and seeing what's happening in the working group for the discussion beforehand. Does anyone else have any thoughts about that? For it being frequently in routing we've had the working group chairs being shepherd, which isn't really as much the goal, right? Because we'd like to spread out some of the workload, give people more experience, and so. But mostly it has to do with spreading out the workload. So the idea of identifying a shepherd very early in the working group document process is a little new, and I'd like to see what people think. Do they think it's a good idea or not?
So I think it's a good idea, but I think a lot of it depends on exactly how much energy you have out of your working group in general. I think a lot of us are in the case where, especially for the smaller working groups, we have a very small number of people that are doing all the real work in the first place, and therefore finding somebody that has the time, the energy, has been paying attention, and is not one of the people that's already one of the authors is a little tricky sometimes.
Completely agree. The other point I'd like to make is there are not a lot of drafts, but not every draft that makes it to adoption makes it to working group last call. So, you know, you're selecting a shepherd for some quantity of drafts that aren't going to make it through the process anyway. So I mean, this is a ideal situation. It's good we're presenting it in these slides, but I am not going to start trying to get a shepherd at this early point in the OSPF working group. I can say that. Just because it's in this, just because it's in Barry's wiki.
Right. I think the point of that draft is to trying to further articulate and perhaps expand a little bit the shepherd role. And I hear your point and Jeff's point. As I say, that if a draft is going to working group last call, I think it's very useful to have a shepherd identified about that point.
I do too. You know, it's kind of like the software development process. There are a lot of things that would be to do ideally, but you know, how much you can really afford to do given time and energy of all the people involved is another thing, and you got to make the right trade-offs.
Absolutely. I think the high level is making sure that the shepherd is somebody who's been paying attention to the conversation earlier, and also that the document shepherd doesn't need to be the working group chair, because obviously the working group chair has been paying attention the whole time. You know, both of those are the case. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight this because this is certainly something different. I'm not saying we need to do it by any stretch. It's just a question of what will work for the different working groups, and I was interested in folks' opinions. Thanks for letting me interrupt in this.
Yeah, I'm really not sure the value of selecting the shepherd that early. I mean, certainly agree that before last call is a good time. It is a good time to have the shepherd, but a call for adoption, I'm not sure what value it really brings. And, you know, someone that you might choose who would be a shepherd then may not be the same person you choose to be shepherd right before last call.
Yeah, it's dependent on each case and working group. And in the draft from the author, he said that he said like a shepherd function more than shepherd person. So the different function of a shepherd could be done by the chair or the shepherd person. The author said that it would be good to select a shepherd at this point, but of course depends of each case. And for example, for RAL, we just recharged them and we have the first work item, and the draft is still in progress. And we are talking about which will be the good shepherd for that document, and still it's not done and published. So it depends on each case. For me, it will be good, of course, depends of the person who is selected of the maturity of the content of the document. But of course, it will be before the last call. Okay. This continue. This draft state the function for each step. The task at the call for adoption will be for the shepherd do the call for adoption, set the deadlines and schedule, and communicate the results to the chair. It's what it states in the draft. And for the next step, the working group document will be basically watch the discussions, start the discussion, push the author, use the tools to create tickets, consider early IAN allocations, and if you see watching the discussion and comment that it's not possible to move the document forward, communicate to the chair as well. I see that a lot of these tasks as well, I mean, are from the chair basically, but the documents state that the shepherd could do as well this task. And in the working group last call, the shepherd should review the measures on the list, watch the review, ask for a specific review in case that is necessary. Will be good to start preparing the shepherd write-up and analyze the results with the chair. For the Shepherd write-up underway step, the Shepherd should be done and should be sent to the mailing list working group. Mailing list and inform in the email. From this point, AD evaluation. Of course, the Shepherd should make sure that the AD reviews are done in time, that the document editor responds in time, and that the issues are tracked in the data tracker. And for the IETF last call stage as well, the Shepherd should monitor the last call comments, make sure that the editor responds on time, and that the issues are tracked in the data tracking. And for the stage of waiting for AD go ahead, the Shepherd should make sure that the new ID is posted and inform to the area director about that, and inform that as well the document is ready for ISG evaluation. And of course, the Shepherd write-up should be updated. For the ISG evaluation, of course, the Shepherd should keep tracking of the discussion and to make sure that all the issues and comments are tracked and addressed by the editors, and the issues are in the data in the data tracking case that it's necessary. For the tags, for the approved by ISG stage, of course, it should work with the responsible area director, understand the needs if it's in the case. Of course, double check with IANA actions and make sure that document editors address all the concerns. Is for the ICC editor queue, actually basically it's talk with the responsible area director if something doesn't look right, but it should follow the natural flow of the process. And for this stage, House 48 as well should monitor that the auto responds on time. And if some reviews need, that the working group take care. When it's published, we should thank the Shepherd for his work. So if we back to our previous point, that we say that the Shepherd write-up should be updated in 4 stages: AD evaluation, IETF last call, ISG evaluation, and FPC editor queue. Based on this draft, we will have that the write-up should be updated basically in each stage after working group last call. So, do you agree with that? For me, it would be okay. I mean, the Shepherd write-up should reflect what's happening with the document in each stage. So it would be good to have like a keep updating that document.
Yeah, I think it depends a little bit on the contentiousness and level of discussion on the document. Certainly if there's active discussion in a stage, then it's useful to summarize it. If there's, you know, it's just going through and there's no comments in IET last call, for instance, or so on, then it's not quite as useful. As I think about the Shepherd as having sort of 2 roles, the primary piece actually is it's not so much the write-up. The write-up's useful and updating the write-up's useful, but what's really helpful is helping drive the process and push the discussion. So that's following up with the authors and making sure comments are being addressed, following up with the ADs to make sure that everything's getting done that needs to get done, and so on, because a lot of the time you end up, you know, there's a number of different drafts being juggled at the same time. And so it's useful to have a person who is focused on one particular draft and helping make sure that work moves ahead on it, basically, so we can get it done.
Okay.
On the other hand, I mean, one of the things that the document Shepherd write-ups are definitely used for is, you know, particularly for, say, ADs who are not in the routing area, then they tend to, for instance, look for, to make sure that process has been followed properly, there were no issues around consensus, that the document's gotten a lot of, sufficient discussion, or there's no concerns about the consensus and so on around it. And that's one of the things that the document the Shepherd write-up is really good for, is to be able to clearly articulate what's happened in the process and whether there were any contentious points or concerns.
Okay. Other comments? Okay, thank you. And okay, in summary, the role of the document shepherd, like Alia said, will be like provide the document write-up and keep and review during ADA evaluation, IETF last call, and follow a discussion, and taking dialogue with the author, AD, and the chair, in case that's necessary, and following up with IAN and FDC editors. So after that, we can say that the document shepherd has a role of a facilitator of document progress. He's going to capture the working discussion and consensus, going to perform final review and checklist, to address I have to check that all the issues are tracked, and assure the author responds promptly on time, and promote clear communication between the parts. So as well, we should not forget to update into the data tracker. And in this state, where the shepherd write-up is underway, the document state should reflect the working consensus waiting for write-up. That's it. And now will be Ace.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Thank you. Yes.
Loud and clear.
I should stop sharing, right? So you can.
Yep, I will share. Okay. I should have been ready. Good morning, everybody. Some of you, I guess, in Europe, so it's good evening. And so we'll go right into talking about the selection of the document shepherd. Go on to the next one because this is covered. In October of 2010, the IESG said that made this the statement that the shepherd doesn't necessarily have to be the chair or the working group secretary. I know in the routing group we only have a few working groups that even have secretaries. So usually that's not really even a case. I mean, we might have a de facto secretary who usually takes notes, but we don't have a formal secretary, at least for most of them. Here, this is of these slides, this is important. If you do not select a chair or the secretary, you want to make sure that it's somebody that's actively engaged in the conversation on the document and has, somebody that you have some confidence. Usually it's somebody who has contributed to the working group with their own drafts or something. That's what we've tried to do, and we've been making a conscious effort to get some other people involved. We started with drafts that weren't that, kind of on the periphery, but now our first choice is to try and get somebody who's a recent, who's active in the working group and is somebody who's a recent addition, not somebody who's, one of the people who's been on the sidelines for 20 years. We're looking more for new people and getting them involved. So the ways of selection, asking for a volunteer, we have not done that. We've asked specific people, and we've gone through a discussion of who might be a good shepherd for a particular document. Anybody else have any comments how they select a shepherd? Has anybody gone to the point of just sending out an email saying who'd like to shepherd this document? I don't think so. I think a better way to do that, if you want to do that, is to send a mail saying who would be willing to shepherd a document in the future. Then you get an idea of who might be in the pool, and you can still make the decision without turning somebody down.
AC, I think Sue was going to say something.
Hi, AC. I was just going to give you feedback. You know, I'm lucky to have several great co-chairs. In IDR, we've been lucky enough in some of the documents that have operational issues, such as the BGP error handling. We were lucky enough to have people who've been active in the working group, but also people who had a vested interest. In other words, Rob Shaker took up the mantle of actually being able to be an operator who was looking at error handling. And I just wanted to say that was very useful. John had done a great job on the document, and then Rob came in and added a whole new slant on the review. That was one step you hadn't mentioned, where we actually targeted not only people who've been working in the working group who've been active, but people of a particular type for a particular type of document. I just wanted to add that to your piece.
That's an excellent point, and I think we don't get into that sort of, but that would be something to add to this. For the pros, you see the last one of the pros is it potentially one more thorough review. But you could add to that, find somebody who will give a review from a different perspective, such as operations, or if it's security related, you know, like if it's something like authentication or security related, that would be a good point to look for someone. And by making them the shepherd, you get somebody with that particular skill to review it as well. The other pros are it builds talent for future working group leadership, either in your working group or another routing working group, and it also gets more people involved in the document process as a whole and IESG reviews. Now, being a document shepherd, like I said, we get a lot of people involved that are offering documents that are, you know, especially new authors who have gotten their documents approved as working group documents. So by being a shepherd, they're familiarizing their selves with the process, and when their document goes to working group last call, it'll definitely make things go smoother and takes the lead off the working group chairs. It seems like it does a little bit, but you'll see it in the rest of the slides. The only cons is you have a startup delay. Of course, you know, because the person's got to familiarize themselves with the shepherd write-up. They got to look at the process. So but that's usually a small price to pay. And a lot of times, if there is controversy, the chairs are going to have to step in and help, because, you know, you get these discussed comments, and you just pick somebody for the first time. You can't expect them to know how to facilitate it. So you might have to get involved and kind of help the thing apart and talk to the shepherd. But that's all part of the learning process of giving them more experience for both in the document process and in potential working group leadership. So in my opinion, the pros greatly exceed the cons. I think I
Hey, AC?
Yes?
One additional point, the rules allow an author to be a shepherd, not the editor, but the author. And I personally think that's a really bad idea. Looks like actually you're getting there when you talk about the conflict of interest. But
yes. There were a couple situations under which you would even dispense the RFC. I think it was 4858 said you wouldn't even use the shepherding process if you couldn't find somebody who wasn't an editor. They actually discouraged it if it was somebody who offered the majority of the documents within the working group. Now, I don't agree with that, so I didn't put that in the slides. Actually, Ines did the slides. We didn't put that. I'm glad she didn't put that in the slides because I really don't agree. You know, like Jeff was saying, a lot of these working groups have a small pool of people doing all the work. So if you pick somebody that's, should pick somebody who's engaged in the protocol or whatever you're standardizing. So I didn't put that, but I think it's generally a bad idea too to have an offer via Shepherd. Okay.
I would actually add it's a really, really bad idea because one of the points of having a shepherd is to have another active party who's going to encourage and facilitate the discussion, and an author's already doing that. So therefore, by definition, an author also can't come across or be sort of a more impartial party who's going to try and negotiate any of the disagreements. So it's just not as nearly as useful to have an author being the shepherd.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess yeah. I'd also.
I mean, you're really de facto going without a shepherd because when you're doing that, because the author is going to be engaged with the comments anyway, hopefully.
Exactly.
Yes. So this just says ultimately that the chairs should judge consensus, and sometimes you know when you have a new shepherd, we have given them hints about things that you want to put in there. Like when we had the auto config draft, there wasn't a lot of conflict, and then at the end somebody made some points, and we went through some iterations with Curtis providing some suggested text that improved the document. But that was a point that the shepherd had missed, and I said, well, you might want to. And I was an author too. Maybe I violated the rules, but I said, you know, you might want to point out that discussion in the discussion of the consensus. Now, I'm going to go through these kind of quickly because they're sort of obvious when you think about it. The fact that there's different types of document shepherd write-up. There's for working group documents, individual submissions, and IAV documents, and IRTF documents. And independent submissions that aren't AD sponsored. Okay. So this is something I learned. I didn't even know there was a new style. There are two types of essay write-up now. This is a 4-question one, which really answers all the same questions that are 19 questions in the 19-question style, but dependent on, but you can do it more without repeating yourself because you cover everything in one fell swoop rather than repeating it under places where in the 19-question version of the shepherd write-up. So starts with a summary, which covers, you know, if you go back to the other one, you got the former 14, it covers basically the first 3 or 4 questions. And you want to make sure, and we'll go back to this, you want to make sure that one thing that you should make sure is that and hopefully this is handled before this point, but the document status is appropriate for the document. I think that's one thing that the chair should be involved, should also look at that for every document that makes it to working group last call. Review and consensus. Here, talk about, you know, how long it's been, when it's been presented, how long it's been discussed, what the major points of contention were, and explain how they were resolved. And most important, whether there are still some points of contention. That's an important thing. And there, you know whether it was a rough consensus where some people didn't agree with the document. any other reviews. Now, normally these reviews aren't, now we have in the routing directorate, we have the QA review. So normally you don't get any expert reviews until after work, you know, the document, the write-up's already done and it's already gone to IESG. But we could mention that the results of the QA review, that was done, and whether or not any major changes were found. And then implementation. One thing, some working groups require two interoperable implementations. Some require, we in OSPF only require it for things that we see as major protocol changes or enhancements. We don't require it for every TLV. So you want to note whether or not there are any implementations and put that in here. One thing that will help is there's an experiment going on right now where rather than doing implementation reports as separate documents, there's an implementation status portion of every RFC. And I think that's a good thing to add, especially to ones that have significant protocol enhancements. Intellectual property. I think ever since we had the problem with this a few years back, I think everybody in the routing working group is pretty good about asking people on multiple, asking the authors on multiple occasions, both when the document is accepted and both when it goes to working group last call if they're aware of any IPR. At least I've seen the polls go out on the many lists that I'm subscribed to.
Just a quick comment on this, Stacey. One thing that may not be apparent if most of the work you're doing is in routing versus other areas, is different areas in the IETF have really strongly different perspectives about how important the IPR is, whether it will change the working group's perspective and so on. And so being very clear about what IPR there is and that it's been discussed and, you know, that there were no comments or concerns in the working group is very important. There are some working groups in the IETF where the fact that there's IPR on a draft is enough to make the working group decide not to do it. Okay,
that's a good point. I know this is a lot of cross-working group. I know there's a lot of drafts. None of them have reached working group last call yet, but there's a lot of segment routing drafts that have IPR from different parties. So that's one thing we're going to need to make sure that those are all discussed and everybody's aware of it, and the disclosures, the formal statements from the parties involved are sent to the list so people can review them.
Right. I mean, there's two pieces. One is to make sure that it's been disclosed, and the second is to make sure that the working group is aware of it when the last calls are done, just to make sure that there's clarity. Yes, a lot of the work in routing does end up having IPR disclosures associated with it, and, you know, that's the way it is, and a lot of the working groups don't seem to have opinions changed as far as to whether or not to proceed in the work. And the main point here is to make sure that the process is followed and that the opportunity for those considerations has been made, and to make sure in this context with the document shepherds that it's well articulated.
So what do you do for in the case where an author won't make a statement one way or the other about whether they believe there's IPR? What do you think the shepherd should do? What do you think the AD should do, the working group chair? Anyone's welcome to answer.
If they won't make a statement in which regard? I mean, they've already...
So, for example, practice in my working group has been to poll all authors before acceptance and also before last call to see if there's IPR, because we didn't used to do that, and we've had some very late disclosures.
Yes, I know.
And so now we refuse to move things forward if authors don't answer. And what do you do when an author doesn't answer?
When the author doesn't answer me, Lou, I basically tell the other authors that it's not going forward, and either they go talk to their co-author and get him to respond, or they can remove the co-author. I really don't have a, and we'll note that he was note he's a contributor. I use social pressure because they must have had a good feeling toward him to start it. If not, so if I make the other authors go chase him, because when they won't respond to me and they won't respond to the list, there's a problem.
And it also sounds like you have some punishment there because they're no longer listed as an author, they're only listed as a contributor.
I've never had to go to the second step, thank goodness. I've only gone and said, if you don't get, please go get your co-authors to work with you, or you're not going forward. And one of the authors wants to go forward, and so that author ends up beating the bush for me at least. Usually, sometimes 2 or 3.
Yeah,
I just want to agree with.
Yeah, same experience. That they won't let it die on the vine just because somebody won't answer right away.
Aren't contributors supposed to stay their APR as well? This is what I'm requesting usually.
Yeah, just one more thing to add to that is, if an author of a working group draft won't answer, it becomes completely unresponsive, for whatever reason, like not just for IPR, but to discussion on the list, it's an appropriate reason to consider removing them. And fortunately, we don't generally have to do this for the reasons that Sue said.
Yeah, as Shepherd, I've also not only asked authors, I've also tried to contact the person directly, and it usually works. I have to say I'm going to be going to the co-authors very shortly on a draft in Tees and say, please get this person to respond, or do what Sue said, move them to contributor. And by the way, Alia, you're co-author.
Yes, I know.
So you know about this. The issue, of course, is that someone changed jobs and is just no longer active in the area.
Right. That does happen. One of the other things I'd remind folks for the IPR declaration is we're polling the authors to remind them explicitly and make sure that they have done this. Their legal obligations their obligation to have disclosed any IPR isn't gone if they don't respond, right? They're supposed to have done this regardless by contributing to the draft. They still have that obligation and have made statements as part of publishing the draft. So this is an important reminder and a process step, and I certainly agree with what you all are saying. But I guess what I'm saying is having an author not respond and then needing to be dropped to a contributor or so on doesn't change their responsibility to disclose it. They're not gaining anything except for an indication of being lame.
Nor does it change the fact that they've contributed to the document. So, for instance, you couldn't remove them and not list them at all in the document. That would be inappropriate. Right,
and you need to do that because they are violating the IPR best current practice rules.
I don't think they're violating anything. They're just not being responsive. And of course, as an author, you're supposed to be, part of being listed on that front page, and why you're listed as a front page and not as a contributor is because you're signing up to be responsive to the editor, the RFC editor, and that's what's responsiveness
that's one thing
is describing.
That's one hard thing about biz documents, because a lot of time just finding these people on biz documents, you don't, and you hate to take them off the offer list completely, but if they've dropped off the face of the earth, you run into these problems both with IPR, with them responding to that, and during 48 hours and other, so that's a difficult point when you're doing biz. I guess they should have an original offer section or something for people that have dropped off the grid. Okay, other points. These are really good. These are on this wiki on the essay document style. A downward reference, in case you'd forgotten what that is, that's a normative reference to a document that has less than, from a standards track or higher document document to say a lower status document for an informational document. It's not that you can't do that, but if you do that, you have to have a reason why. You have to document it on this wiki. And there's a process for it. You have to check the Shepherd and who's ever actually this, like I said, this is really good for any time you're reviewing a document, whether it be as a Shepherd or routing directorate or whatever. You can check the IANA considerations. Here's all the different things. A couple slides over. But the IANA considerations to make sure that they're following the policy for the registry, they have the right registry name, things like that. Okay. I'm not going to go through all these, but this is really a good set of good checklist. I think it said that ID NITS will actually check for downward references now. The thing about the abstract, I sort of agree with that, but I think we're asking a lot of people to try and improve somebody's abstract. I usually, having a lot of different people with different levels of English language mastery and everything, I try and make sure that it's concise. I don't usually try and rewrite it. And I don't know if we can expect Shepherds to do that, but if it's making sure that it contains enough information to stand alone, that's a good point. I see Adrian's not on the call. He's made some good observations I've seen in his reviews of abstracts. Okay, this is restates the IPR. I think we went through all these. Oh, if it's a biz document, have the errata been considered? That's also a good point. Here's that IANA checklist. Again, make sure that that allocations and registries follow the policy for that registry. And says, has the working group chosen the allocation procedures and policies? We kindly have a boilerplate one that we use. We have had situations where we have discussed these and changed them, but it's kind of rare. Okay, these are the ones I'm going to go through pretty fast. These are AD-sponsored individual submissions. They point to the old write-up. However, I'm making a judgment call that you can use the essay style for any type of write-up. You don't have to use the old style.
Absolutely.
Once it makes it through the IESG, the telechat, all the discusses, if there are any, all the discusses from, we'll probably get more discusses now that we have 3 ADs because the other groups are going to feel even more slighted by us and feeling they're going to have to put their stamp on our documents. So we'll probably get more from other working groups. But once those are all done, there's a write-up from the IESG. Now, this was in the document, but who do you think writes this? You've all read this. It is not the protocol, it is not the Shepherd or the working group chair, it is the area director who writes this. But they use the Shepherd write-up as a direct input into it.
Because it writes is a little strong. There's a whole lot of copying that goes on with this one.
Okay.
But yes, for most documents, you just, the AD, or at least I, end up copying most of the content from the document shepherd write-up. It's only if there's anything particularly nuanced or exciting to put in that there's any originality in what's in that write-up. Okay,
good. Well, that makes the quality of the write-up even more important. And IAB documents, these also have a process, and they have a document shepherd as well. The document shepherd can be selected by the IAB. Internet Routing Task Force documents, they also have a shepherd write-up. They'd be, again, selected by the IETF. And independent submissions. But it doesn't say anything about, for independent, it doesn't say anything about the write-up, but there was a comment that it should be part of the process. I don't know, how would you, I guess as working group chairs, this isn't our responsibility for independent submissions, but how would one find this? Who would be responsible for finding it? Does anybody have any ideas? Finding the shepherd for independent submission?
I think there's two cases. Either the independent submission editor finds a shepherd for the draft. I think that's pretty common. I'm not sure if he sometimes asks the authors to find a shepherd for him or not.
Okay. And
but I think this is only if it's AD sponsored, right? If it comes through really independent, I don't think we would see this at all.
Well, it was asked for in a comment on an individual submission. So.
Yeah, but it came through via an AD.
Oh, right, sponsoring guidelines. Okay. So I guess the answer is for independent submission, there is no shepherd.
Yep. AC, I clicked on that link because actually right now I'm doing a conflict review for one of the MPLS ones, and that link doesn't work.
I'll have to correct that. We'll have to correct that. I'll see.
And I looked. I couldn't even find that document, but I think it's really if it's coming via an AD, like that MPLS TP stuff was that way.
Right. But let's see if it's in our references. We have some better links. I know I got most of those.
I'm thinking this is not if when the ISG is asked to evaluate something from really the independent track, like it didn't come through any working group that decided something should be AD sponsored.
Well, there's two different cases, right? One is the independent stream, and that's where I answered, where Neville, who's the independent stream editor, finds a shepherd for the independent stream documents. For the independent submission via AD, there's a couple possibilities. Generally, I've been asking the authors to go away and find a shepherd and then come back, and that's worked pretty successfully. Sometimes I toss requests for AD sponsoring at the routing area working group. Or, if I have particular concerns about the document, then I might go and find a particular person to be a shepherd. But usually in characteristic AD work shedding load, I make the authors find a shepherd.
Okay, that's good. That's good. And so, but when I've seen AD sponsored too, they normally come through a working group. I mean, they're assigned to some working group usually, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I've seen. Like the MPLS TP was an example. But
No.
Stuff this recent one, I don't think so.
Okay. So if it's AD sponsored, it doesn't come through a working group. A lot of the time in routing, instead of AD sponsoring, we have them go through a working group. So a lot of the please sponsor this draft. I've been tossing at the routing area working group to say, hey, are you all interested in this? Because I feel that the process of being in the working group, you get much better review than just asking for an AD sponsor. So while I'm willing to do it. At the same time, I say that, but I have some of the drafts, say, from closing CARP, where I'm progressing one of those that's finally ready. Similarly, there's a couple drafts from Forces now that it's closed that still need to get processed, and so those are going through the AG sponsoring process. There's another draft that Alvaro had asked me to look at a while ago, which probably doesn't make sense to go through R2GWG and might get AD sponsored. So this path does happen. I'd say that my feeling is it's really useful to have the review, and so that's part of why we have R2GWG, but there are definitely a number of drafts that go AD sponsored.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see which one Alvaro is, just as an example, which one he's pushing right now. And we just had the only thing we got left is we had a section that the document shepherd asked for permission. Well, actually, if you have a login, and all working group chairs do, you can update the shepherd right here yourself. And I don't know if I'd make a shepherd get a tracker log on just to do it. I mean, it's a 20-second operation to put the shepherd in. And I noticed the last document we did, I went to see, okay, maybe I'll update this one, but the IETF secretary, IESG secretary had already updated the shepherd, so I didn't need to. But you can do that.
Just a quick comment. The other advantage of having your name in the document tracker as a shepherd is it will also update all of the various mail aliases, so then you will be included on draft.all and draft.shepherd, so that it's easier to make sure that the document shepherd is included in all of the email conversations automatically.
Yeah, you can. As a matter of fact, you can take, you're included automatically in that. You can take the name of any draft and and send it to that alias, and it'll hit all the people, which is nice. I forget exactly the algorithm. I just have to look at one of my old ones, but it's the first part of draft IETF role applicability or something about the name at IETF to tracker IES or something at tracker or something. I don't think it's IETF.org. Maybe it is. It's just that simple, and then you get all the people, all the authors and the chairs and the AD and the shepherds.
I think it's tools.ietf.org.
That's it. Yep. At tools. Yeah. Just the draft about the number at tools.ietf.org. Yep, and that'll get everybody.
You don't need to put at tools anymore. There's been a shift to put all of that on at IETF, and in fact, the tools points to IETF. So both work.
Yeah, and in fact, the mailer on tools seems to be deficient relative to the one on IETF, so it's preferable to use the IETF one.
Oh, really? I can check that.
Yeah, well, there's some deficiency, I can tell you, related to my company's mail hosting service, who shall remain nameless. And whoever is running the tools mail server, the interaction results in the tools mail server deciding that my mail is spam more often than not, but the same problem doesn't exist when sending to IETF.org.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting observation. I won't even try and speculate why, but here's the other port. Here's a good the final good reference in this presentation are the list of references. I'm trying to look for that one on IESG sponsored. Here, this statement AD, but it's not a draft. So maybe what happened is that draft. This does exist. You see, this is the guidance on area director sponsored documents. And the other thing I just wanted to show you, here's the essay style, and there's that checklist that's really valuable anytime you're reviewing a draft, not just as a shepherd, but if, routing directory or whatever. And finally, let's see, here is I think I just erased it. I think I just erased it. But if you remember, there was actually the 19 question essay as well. And I guess that's it. This is the essay style, the 4 question.
The
question on the, sorry.
Oh, here's the 19, and here's the old 19. Here's the old 19 question one. I found it in my recently closed tabs. And both of these are in our references. And this is the one, and this is the new one. This is the essay one. Am I the only one who didn't know that this existed before we started looking at this training? The new style?
You're not the only one.
Okay.
It's only been around for about a year or year and a half, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe slightly longer. It had been created before I became an AD, but hadn't been used a lot. There seemed to, and the idea was just give shepherds the option of one or the other. It wasn't clear that it worked so much better that we should force people to change over, but some people really liked it.
I looked at it at one point and concluded that it made my life harder as a shepherd. Maybe it's just because I was used to doing it the old way. I don't know.
Yeah.
So which is the way that comes up automatically in the data tracker, the 17 or the 4 now? Question.
So.
Sorry, the 17?
The non-essay is my memory.
Mm-hmm. That, you know, for somebody, you think about that, in some ways, it is easier to answer a lot of short questions than it is to sit down and summarize the consensus, even if, but I can see the point of this in that it eliminates some of the repetition that was in the 19 question write-up. Anyway, as luck would have it, Murphy's Law is in play, and there's people outside. I don't know, you can hear that background noise, doing work on my landscaping today.
You sound fine to me.
No, you got to tell them to get louder.
Okay. Oh, good. Good. So I guess that was it. So I guess we can go to the next phase of the discussion or whatever.
Sure. Are there any comments or more discussion that people would like to have on record?
Yeah. This is Chris Bowers here. Back to the IPR part of it, about having an author who won't respond, but has contributed to a document. It seems like in addition to removing him, you really need the shepherd should be documenting that this is now an issue for the document. And even if the working group doesn't take action on it or still wants to do working group last call, is the IESG the one who is going to enforce perhaps not adopting the document if it's potentially not following IETF IPR rules?
Chris, hey, does he only not respond on the IPR, or she, or is it in general for everything? Because they have to be responsive, right, all for everything later.
Well, so we went through this scenario of a potential solution for an author who has contributed to a document but is not responding to the request to acknowledge that all IPR related to this document has been disclosed. So simply moving that author off of the author list doesn't remove the problem, right? Potentially, this document, if it goes to RFC, could then, and people implement it, could come back with, you know, this author or this author's company enforcing intellectual property rights related to this. So it seems like the proper thing to do is actually document in a lot of detail what this is, what this problem is, so that even if the working group doesn't want to, you know, enforce this, the IESG has the information to enforce it.
Yeah, that seems like a very valid point, that it should be mentioned in the write-up. You know, stating the facts, not necessarily a recommendation.
Yeah, I was thinking, you know, we cannot really, like, there's always all the discussion. We cannot enforce the IPR. I mean, it's a statement everybody has when they walk into the meetings, when they author drafts, but like everybody says, there's no real legal enforcement. So I would say if somebody doesn't respond to emails, it would be a reason to kick them off as an author. And then as far as the legal stuff later, I mean, that's for the legal people to figure out.
Well, no, but I mean, I think the goal is, if a document doesn't, you know, potentially has IPR that's not disclosed and offered on, you know, certain terms, then the IESG does not want to adopt it in general, or at least wants the information to not make it an RFC.
I'm not sure that that's a correct statement. I think they want the information to be documented. I don't think there's a statement on not moving forward drafts with IPR.
Well, but with undisclosed IPR, I mean,
then it's not disclosed. Then all that you can say is this person has contributed, they've been asked to make a statement, and they haven't.
And
okay.
If it's undisclosed, actually, we could say, well, how do we know? I mean, like Boo and I was one time, but what are you going to do? Disclose it?
I'm not saying you can do anything. But that, I think, so I would highlight it and not bury the information by removing the author. Maybe that gets them through working group last call, but document that that's been done, because. So, Aaliyah, what's your take on this? I mean, does the IESG want to know this?
I think it's useful to put it in there. As I said, the polls that we do are a reminder to the authors, because we've been burned by late disclosures of IPR several years ago, and so we're trying to help avoid having that happen. And by doing it, it also raises the profile in general to people to remember to get their IPR disclosed. It doesn't change they still have the same legal obligation to have disclosed any IPR before, you know, when they produce the document regardless. So responding or not responding doesn't affect that. Understanding that one of the authors has gone, you know, inactive is useful. If there were indications that it actually was related to undisclosed IPR, though, again, how would we know? That might be useful.
Yeah, but documenting that, for whatever circumstances, documenting that an author has been moved to contributor
is important.
Is a worthwhile thing to document in the Shepherd write-up. So I think that's a really good point. And yes, there may or may not be IPR enforcement implications, but that's not for us to even comment on. But to document the facts, I think, is really an excellent point.
Yep. I mean, one of the points of the Shepherd write-up is to make sure that we understand anything that was contentious or concerning about it, and bumping an author to contributor, you know, is concerning, right? It's something that's a little unusual, though obviously does happen, particularly when we get, you know, very authorful drafts. So it's good to document. Any other comments or questions now?
I did look it up. The AD sponsored submission, it says the authors should find a willing external shepherd. So what you're doing is exactly what the process says. Aaliyah.
Good to know. That's not surprising. It's usually the goal is find someone else to, you know, if the authors care about it and having the draft progress, then the onus is on them to do the work to make sure that happens. Okay. Are there any other questions right now? All right, I'm going to stop the recording then.